Let me ask you a very serious question. Why do you insist on acting like a bulldozer every time you go fishing? You have been told your entire life that the biggest, oldest fish live at the very bottom of the lake, resting in the deepest, darkest holes. But what if I told you that this old, sacred rule is exactly why you are going home empty-handed? Today we are going to talk about a brutal truth that most old-school anglers refuse to accept. Your bait is literally hiding in the mud, completely invisible, while the fish you want to catch are actively swimming above it, staring at the sky. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will rethink every single cast you make from now on. You are going to discover the real reason why the guy next to you is pulling in giant fish, while you are just pulling in weeds and old sticks. So tell me in the comments right now, before we even start. How much lead weight do you usually slap on your line just to make sure you hit the dirt? We all know where this habit comes from. It is deeply ingrained in our fishing DNA. You remember those early mornings as a kid when your dad or grandpa handed you a rod with a giant egg sinker and told you to cast it out, tighten the line, and just wait for the bell to ring. It feels safe. It feels like real fishing. There is a psychological comfort in feeling your weight hit the solid bottom. You think to yourself, okay, my bait is down there in the strike zone. But the problem is, lakes and rivers are not static swimming pools. They are complex environments that change by the hour. Yet, millions of fishermen do the exact same thing for decades. They cast heavy rigs into the mud, crack open a drink, and refuse to adapt. They believe that if the fish are hungry, they will eventually come down and root through the dirt like pigs to find that one piece of corn or single worm. This blind faith in bottom fishing is the #1 reason why so many weekend trips turn into boring camping trips next to the water. Imagine this scenario. It is 6 in the morning, the mist is still hovering over the cold water, and you have got a hot cup of coffee in one hand. You bait up your hook with a beautiful, juicy worm, snap on a heavy lead weight, and launch it as far as you can. You hear that satisfying splash, watch the line sink, reel in the slack until it is perfectly tight, and you sit back in your folding chair. You are doing exactly what your grandfather taught you and his grandfather before him. Find the deep hole, cast into it, pin your bait to the mud, and wait. 1 hour passes, then 2 hours pass. The sun gets higher, your coffee gets completely cold, and your rod tip has not moved a single inch. You start muttering to yourself that the weather is wrong, or the barometer is falling, or the fish are just not biting today. But let me tell you the harsh reality of this beautiful morning. The fish are biting. They are just not biting your bait. Because while you are stubbornly burying your hook in the dark, stinky silt, the fish are swimming 3 feet above it, actively looking up at the surface for their next meal. You are fishing in a graveyard, my friend. Let us talk about biological reality for a second. Have you ever actually looked at the anatomy of a predatory fish? Most of the fish we love to catch have eyes positioned toward the upper half of their head. They are biologically engineered to look upward. Why? Because the sky provides a bright background. Any small baitfish, bug, or frog swimming above them creates a dark, distinct silhouette against that bright light. It is nature's perfect targeting system. When a fish is hungry and on the prowl, it is scanning the water above its head, waiting for that easy target to drift by. But what are you doing? You are putting your bait below their line of sight. You are placing your trap in the one place they are specifically ignoring. If you drop a dark worm onto a dark, muddy bottom, it blends in completely. The fish can swim right over it, mere inches away, and never even know it is there. You are basically demanding that the fish look down into the darkest part of the water against their natural hunting instincts just to find your hook. Now, let us get into the mud trap. I do not think most fishermen realize what actually happens when a heavy egg sinker crashes into a soft lake bottom. Think about an anchor dropping into sand. It kicks up a cloud of debris and buries itself. Your bait, trailing just behind or right next to that weight, gets dragged right into that same mess. If the bottom is soft silt or thick muck, your juicy crawler or expensive artificial lure is instantly covered in dirt. It stops moving. It stops emitting a natural scent, replacing it with the smell of rotting bottom vegetation. You are sitting on the bank, imagining this perfect presentation down there, but the truth is, your hook is a buried secret. A fish would literally have to dig through the debris, like a dog burying a bone, just to find it. And unless you are fishing for bottom-feeding scavengers, like certain types of catfish or carp, predatory fish simply are not going to waste their time rooting around in the dirt when there is fresh, clean food swimming directly above them in the clear water. There is this massive myth in the fishing community that we need to bust right now. The myth of the lazy fish. People love to say that when the weather is tough or the water is a little cold, the fish go to the very bottom and lay there on their bellies, resting in the mud. They think fish are like tired dogs sleeping on a rug. This is absolute nonsense. Fish do not have beds on the bottom of the lake. While they might move to deeper water to find stable temperatures, they rarely pin themselves physically to the dirt. They suspend. They hover in the water column, maintaining neutral buoyancy, saving energy while keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. If you are casting a 2-ounce lead weight and letting it sit on the bottom, you are casting underneath the fish. You could be surrounded by hundreds of resting, suspended fish, but because your bait is sitting in the mud 5 feet beneath them, you will never get a bite. Stop treating the bottom of the lake like a hotel floor where the fish are sleeping. If you want to understand why dragging the bottom is foolish, you have to understand the thermocline. In the middle of summer, lakes separate into layers. The top layer is warm and full of oxygen. The middle layer, the thermocline, is where the temperature drops rapidly. And the bottom layer? It is cold, dark, and often completely dead. As organic matter decays on the bottom of the lake, it uses up all the oxygen. In many lakes, by late July or August, the deepest bottom areas are completely devoid of oxygen. If a fish swims down there, it will literally suffocate. Yet where do you cast? You find the deepest hole on your contour map, chuck your heavy rig right into the middle of it, and let it sink to the absolute bottom. You are fishing in a dead zone. You are putting your bait in a toxic, suffocating environment where no living game fish can survive for more than a few minutes. Meanwhile, the fish are stacked up comfortably 10 feet higher in the water column, enjoying the oxygen and chasing bait. You have to learn to fish where the life is. Let us picture a quiet evening on the water. The sun is starting to set, casting an orange glow across the lake. The wind dies down, and the water becomes flat like glass. Suddenly, you start seeing tiny ripples, then small splashes. Rings are forming all over the surface. A massive bug hatch is happening. Insects are emerging from the water, fluttering their wings, and the fish are going absolutely crazy. You can hear them slurping and smacking the surface. It is a fisherman's dream. But what are you doing? You are sitting there with a heavy sinker, holding your bait pinned to the bottom in 20 feet of water. You are watching the fish feed aggressively right in front of your face, but you refuse to change your rig. You tell yourself that the big ones are still down deep. You let your stubbornness ruin what could be the best hour of fishing in your entire life. When the fish are clearly showing you that they are looking up and feeding near the surface, you must abandon the bottom. Cut that heavy sinker off immediately. We have all been in this incredibly frustrating situation. You are sitting on the bank or in your boat, and there is another guy fishing about 50 feet away from you. You have got your classic bottom rigs out. He is using a slip bobber or a slowly sinking lure. Your rods are dead quiet. You have not had a bite in 3 hours. But this guy? He is setting the hook every 15 minutes. He is pulling in beautiful, healthy fish, laughing, having the time of his life. You watch him closely, trying to figure out his secret. You wonder what secret scent he is using or what magical bait he bought at the store. But the secret is not the bait. It is the depth. He realized hours ago that the fish was suspended about midway down the water column. He adjusted his float or his retrieve to keep the bait hovering exactly at their eye level. He is presenting the food right where they are looking, while you are stubbornly punishing the mud with a chunk of lead. It is a harsh lesson in humility, but it proves that depth control is way more important than bait selection. Think about the natural food sources in your lake. Think about shiners, minnows, shad, or whatever small bait fish live in your local waters. Do these little fish burrow into the mud like earthworms? Do they swim around, dragging their bellies on the silt? Of course not. They are silver, flashy little creatures that dart around in the middle and upper parts of the water column. They school up and swim near weed edges or in open water. So, if a big predator fish spends its entire life hunting these suspended, free-swimming baitfish, why in the world would you try to catch that predator by burying your bait in the dirt? It makes no logical sense. When you drag a bait rigidly through the muck, it does not act like a natural baitfish. It acts like a piece of garbage being pulled along the bottom. If you want to trigger a natural predatory instinct, you have to make your bait behave like the real food. It needs to be up off the bottom, moving erratically, flashing in the sunlight, and looking vulnerable in the open water. One of the biggest problems with modern fishermen is that they think bobbers are just for little kids fishing for tiny panfish off a dock. There is an ego thing involved. Grown men want to use heavy bait-casting gear, braided line, and big weights because it feels more professional. But let me tell you a secret. The slip float is one of the most deadly, professional tools in the entire fishing world. When you use a slip float, you have absolute surgical control over the depth of your bait. If the fish are suspended 12 feet down in 20 feet of water, you set your bobber stop at 12 feet. Your bait drops perfectly into their strike zone and stays there, suspended freely, moving naturally with the waves. It is not buried in the mud. It is not dragging through bottom slime. It is hanging right in front of their faces, helpless and tempting. Ditch the ego. Stop thinking that bottom fishing is the only mature way to fish. A properly rigged slip float will outfish a heavy bottom rig 9 days out of 10. You also have to consider the power of the wind and the current. Water is never completely still. Even on a calm day, there are underwater currents moving continuously. These currents carry tiny particles, plankton, dead bugs, and small baitfish. And where do these currents usually flow? They flow through the middle and upper layers of the water column. The bottom of a deep lake is often the most stagnant, motionless place. Fish are smart. They face into these underwater currents and let the moving water bring the food directly to them. They hover above the bottom, waiting for the conveyor belt of the lake to deliver their dinner. When you pin your bait to the absolute bottom, you are taking it completely out of this natural flow. Your bait is sitting perfectly still in stagnant water, ignoring the dynamic movement of the lake. To get a bite, you need your bait to drift naturally with the current, tumbling and moving just like a real piece of food being washed away. Let us talk about lures for a minute. Even guys who cast artificial lures fall into the mud trap. You tie on a heavy jig, cast it out, let it sink until the line goes slack, and then you start dragging it across the bottom. You feel every rock, every branch, every clump of mud. You think you are doing a great job keeping contact with the bottom. But what are you actually doing? You are kicking up a massive trail of silt, constantly getting snagged and pulling your lure below the vision line of the fish. Instead of a slow, mesmerizing swim that mimics a dying baitfish, you are presenting a frantic, unnatural object plowing through the dirt. Try this instead. Cast that same jig, let it sink halfway down, and start a slow, steady retrieve. Let it swim through the open water. Let the paddle tail kick and vibrate freely without constantly crashing into rocks. You will be absolutely shocked at how many aggressive strikes you get from fish that rush up from below to smash it before it gets away. If you do not believe me about fish suspending, just look at any modern sonar screen. We live in an era of incredible fishing technology. Guys have screens on their boats that look like flat-screen televisions. And what do those screens show us? Day after day, hour after hour, the sonar screens show massive arches of fish hanging in the middle of the water column. You will see the bottom marked clearly as a thick line, and then you will see the fish hovering 5, 10, or 15 feet above it. The electronics have proven definitively that the old-school idea of fish hugging the mud is completely false. Yet, even guys with these expensive fish finders will see fish suspended at 10 feet, and out of pure habit, they will drop their heavy jig all the way to the bottom at 30 feet and start jigging. It is absolute madness. You are looking right at the fish on the screen, and you are intentionally dropping your lure past them into the empty dirt. Trust your eyes, trust the technology, and stop fishing where the fish are not. The sun and the heat also play a massive role in why dragging the bottom is a terrible idea. In the middle of a bright, sunny day, the sun penetrates deep into the clear water. Fish do not have eyelids. They cannot squint. Bright sunlight is uncomfortable for them. So what do? They seek shade, but they do not always swim to the very bottom to find it. Often, they will move right up under the canopy of thick weed beds, or they will suspend directly beneath a floating dock, or they will hang tight under the shade of a large fallen tree. They move up to find cover. If you are casting a heavy sinker out into the deep, open mud basin during the middle of the day, you are fishing in an empty desert. The fish have moved up into the structure. You need to be casting unweighted or very lightly weighted baits right into the tops of the weeds, or skipping them under the docks. You have to put the bait where the fish are hiding from the sun, not drag it blindly through the deep, exposed mud. There is a real psychological fear that fishermen have when it comes to fishing the middle of the water column. It is the fear of empty space. When your bait is on the bottom, you can feel the bottom. When your bait is on the surface, you can see it on the surface. But when your bait is 10 feet down in 20 feet of water, you cannot see it, and you cannot feel it against any structure. It feels like your bait is just floating out in the middle of nowhere, lost in space. That lack of physical reference makes a lot of fishermen very nervous. They lose confidence. They quickly reel in and add more weight so they can get back in touch with the mud. You have to conquer this mental block. You have to learn to trust the open water. You have to visualize your bait swimming beautifully through that empty space, knowing that this is exactly where the predators are prowling. Getting comfortable with fishing the middle column is the biggest leap you will ever make as an angler. Let us think about a live night crawler or a big, beautiful leech. These are some of the best baits on planet Earth, but they only work if they can move. A leech swims with a beautiful, undulating ribbon-like motion. A night crawler stretches and curls in the water. This movement creates tiny vibrations that fish can feel with their lateral lines. Now, what happens when you pin that leech to the mud with a 1-ounce egg sinker? You crush its spirit. It tries to swim, but it is anchored to the dirt. It eventually just balls up into a tight, useless knot covered in silt. But if you take that same leech, hook it lightly, and put it beneath a slip float so it hovers 2 feet above the bottom, magic happens. That leech will swim continuously. It will stretch out, flutter, and send out distress signals in every direction. It becomes a glowing beacon of free food. The fish will see the movement from 10 yards away and come rushing in. Do not suffocate your live bait in the mud. Let it dance in the open water. We also need to talk about the power of the reaction strike. A lot of big fish are not actively feeding all day long. They have windows where they eat and times when they just suspend and hang out. When a fish is just hanging out, a piece of bait sitting motionless in the mud below them is not going to wake them up. They do not care. But if a bait suddenly flutters down from the sky, right past their face, it triggers a primal instinct. Even a fish that is not hungry will often snap at something that falls quickly right in front of its nose. It is a reflex action, just like swatting a fly buzzing past your head. You cannot get a reaction strike if your bait is already dead on the bottom. You only get reaction strikes when your bait is moving dynamically through the water column. By stopping your heavy bottom fishing and switching to lighter weights that allow the bait to fall slowly and naturally through the strike zone, you will catch fish that were not even actively looking for food. If you absolutely insist on fishing the bottom because the current is too strong or you are fishing a specific river situation, you still do not have to drag your bait through the mud. You can change your approach entirely just by modifying your leader length and using a floating element. Instead of tying your hook right next to the heavy weight, tie a 3 or 4 foot leader of fluorocarbon line. Then, add a small brightly colored float pill or inject a little air into your worm. When your heavy weight hits the bottom, your bait will not sink into the mud. Instead, it will float up on that long leader, hovering 3 feet off the bottom, dancing freely in the current above the silt line. You get the stability of a bottom rig, but the visual presentation of a suspended bait. It is a simple 5-minute adjustment that will completely change your catch rate. You elevate the food directly into the fish's upward line of sight, turning a useless rig into a highly effective trap. Have you ever considered the actual sound of your cast? When you heave a 2-ounce chunk of lead into a quiet pond, it sounds like someone threw a bowling ball into the water. It creates a massive, unnatural crash. In shallow or clear water, that loud splash and the subsequent crash onto the bottom sends shockwaves through the water that terrify every fish within 50 yards. They scatter immediately. You are literally scaring the fish away before your bait even settles. But when you fish lighter, targeting the upper water column, your presentation is stealthy. A lightly weighted plastic worm or a small bobber lands with a soft, gentle tick. Instead of terrifying the fish, that soft little splash actually sounds like a frog jumping in or a bug falling from a tree. It attracts curious predators. They hear the soft noise, look up, and see your bait slowly sinking. You turn a terrifying event into a dinner bell. Finesse and a lighter touch will almost always beat heavy, loud, and muddy. Ultimately, catching more fish comes down to one specific trait, and that is mental flexibility on the water. The worst anglers are the ones who make a plan the night before, arrive at the lake, and stick to that plan no matter what the water is telling them. They decide they are going to fish the bottom, and they will stubbornly stare at a motionless rod for 8 hours just to prove a point. The best anglers are observers. They cast, they wait 15 minutes, and if nothing happens, they change. They shorten their leader, they take off the heavy sinker, they try a float, they look for signs of life on the surface. They realize that the fish dictate the rules, not the fisherman. If you are dragging the mud and getting nothing but snagged leaves, the lake is screaming at you to change your depth. Stop fighting the reality of the situation. Pull your bait out of the dirt, clean the slime off your hook, and start exploring the beautiful, lively water hanging right above your head. Let us put this all together for your next trip. When you arrive at the water, before you rig up that heavy sinker out of pure habit, take a deep breath and look around. Look for bugs on the surface. Watch the direction of the wind. Think about the water temperature and where the oxygen is. Start your day by casting something that searches the middle of the water column. Throw a swimming plastic or set a slip float halfway down to the bottom. Give the fish a chance to see your bait silhouetted against the bright sky. I promise you, the very first time you feel that violent strike from a massive fish hitting your bait suspended in the open water, your entire philosophy will change. You will feel the explosive power of a fish that hunted down your bait, rather than just lazily sucking it out of the mud. You will finally understand the water column in 3 dimensions. And you will never blindly drag your bait through the useless, dirty mud ever again. So, here is the ultimate takeaway from all of this. The biggest twist in your fishing career is realizing that the heavy lead sinker you trusted your whole life is actually your worst enemy. The bottom of the lake is not a magical hotel for giant fish. In many cases, it is a cold, dark, oxygen-starved desert where your bait becomes completely invisible. By simply taking off the weight, using a float, or swimming your bait through the middle of the water column, you are finally putting your food right where the predators are naturally looking. You are playing to their biology, not against it. This one shift in perspective will absolutely transform the way you fish, and you will catch fish on days when everyone else is complaining about the weather. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me today. If this video made you rethink your tackle box, please hit that subscribe button right now and smash the like button so more fishermen can learn the truth. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. What was your biggest catch when you finally stopped fishing the bottom and tried something different? Let us start a debate in the comments.